By an escalating Russian probe that's now bearing down on the White House itself, President Trump has disavowed George Papadopoulos, the campaign foreign policy advisor who Trump once called an excellent guy. Now that Papadopoulos is a proactive cooperator in the special counsel's investigation, the message from the White House and Trump's allies is, we hardly knew him.
But he was not a person who was involved with the day-to-day operations of the campaign or a person who I recall interacting with on a regular basis at all.
This was a campaign volunteer. He wasn't somebody that was a senior advisor, as many of you want to bill him to be. He was somebody that played a minimal role, if one at all, and was part of a voluntary advisory board. That's it.
I never heard of Papadopoulos. He never showed up at Trump Tower, never had any interaction with any of the campaign leaders around me. So the guy was the coffee boy.
Well, the bigger question that should be looming over the president right now is who in his circle knew what Papadopoulos was up to. We know that Papadopoulos revealed to Mueller's investigators that he had long planned to arrange a meeting in Russia between members of the Trump campaign and Russian officials. NBC News is reporting that Papadopoulos' superior, former Trump campaign co-chair Sam Clovis, testified before a federal grand jury last week. And now Clovis' attorney appears to be denying a key part of what Papadopoulos revealed to investigators, that her client encouraged a trip to Russia on behalf of the campaign. Quote, Dr. Clovis always vigorously opposed any Russian trip for Donald Trump or staff. But the lawyer added the caveat that, quote, if someone posed foreign travel in a personal capacity, Dr. Clovis would have no authority to prohibit such travel. That is lawyer talk. As we learned on Monday, documents unsealed after Clovis testified appear to show that Clovis did encourage such a meeting, as he told Papadopoulos, I would encourage you to make the trip if it is feasible. Meanwhile, Mueller is creeping closer to the White House itself. Politico reports his investigators are scheduled to interview Trump's close aide, Hope Hicks, later this month, as well as 3 or 4 other current White House officials as early as this week. By now, there's no question that they're aware of the consequences of making false statements to investigators. I'm joined right now by Nicole Wallace, host of Deadline White House on MSNBC. Joy Reid's host of AM Joy on MSNBC. Kari Kadera is a former senior associate general counsel with the Office of Director of National Intelligence. And also with us is Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, who sits on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Blumenthal, are they threatening me, Senator, with a perjury charge that if he already said something that wasn't quite accurate, they got him on that? Now they pled bargained the guy down to from 0 time to 6 months. That doesn't seem like throwing the book at the guy. It looks to me like they scared him into a deal. Your thoughts?
They have reduced multiple counts of false statements, each punishable by 5 years in prison, to a single count of a maximum exposure of less than 6 months, and obviously the potential of probation if he continues to cooperate, but only if he's truthful and only if he really gives them results. And that's why clearly what they're doing is climbing the ladder of culpability in that campaign, from Papadopoulos to the campaign supervisor, and there are multiple contacts in that document with a campaign supervisor, and then with the campaign senior advisor. And if you look at that table where Donald Trump is at the one end and Jeff Sessions is at the other, you know that campaign supervisor could well reach high into the campaign apparatus.
Now, they're all denying this. So let's go to the Sam Clovis, who apparently was the next rung up on the ladder from Papadopoulos. He's denying a lot of this. But one thing he's particularly denying is that his lawyer is denying, rather, that he had anything to do with encouraging Papadopoulos to go to Russia by saying, well, if he wanted to go on his own, I couldn't stop him. Well, that is lawyer talk. Nobody said you couldn't stop him. But who's going to go to Russia on their own dime on campaign business? It seemed to me a very clever way of avoiding, yes, he did encourage him to go. Your answers, Senator.
That statement of offense, the plea document, is a remarkable tableau, a chilling story of the collusion that Russia was seeking to arrange and the multiple contacts that took place in March and April of 2016. To say it would have been a private unauthorized trip simply fails to pass the smell test. And what's really happening here is the special counsel is saying to all the potential witnesses, the train is leaving. This plea occurred on October 5th. It was unsealed only recently. There's more to come. Now is the time to follow Papadopoulos and cooperate, not Manafort, and confront us and face this multiple count indictment with very heavy potential imprisonment. And I would predict we'll see more action soon, more indictments, and possible plea agreements.
Kari, let me ask you about this violation of the law. Maybe it's not always enforced, but there's something called the Logan Act. You get the word on a campaign. These Russians want to meet to give us some dirt to work out something in terms of U.S. foreign policy, I assume. They want somebody from the campaign to come over to Russia. They want to meet and discuss this whole aspect of you might be the next president, therefore we got to talk about this. And what we have to talk about is helping you get that job as president. It just seems to be creepily illegal, is it, what we're hearing here?
Well, you know, what's amazing to me as someone who served on another campaign's advisory committee on foreign policy and national security is that nobody in this who was receiving these different emails from Papadopoulos seemed to understand Russia as a threat as it's understood by the rest of the intelligence community and national security community. Russia, the director of national intelligence, has put out threat reports that indicate that Russia is a military, diplomatic, cybersecurity, economic threat to the United States. And so what's in the Papadopoulos plea is just one snapshot of one person's explanation of the various emails and communications that were trying to be set up with representatives of the Russian government. But there is more to what Papadopoulos knows that is probably not in that plea agreement that the special counsel's office knows. And the special counsel's office is now going to look at what all the other individuals in the campaign knew about these potential meetings and coordinations that took place.
Well, as Senator Blumenthal just mentioned, we also learned this week that in a meeting with Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions in March of 2016, Papadopoulos said that he had connections that could help arrange a meeting between then-candidate Trump and President Putin himself, which Papadopoulos later tried to arrange. Well, today, Sarah Huckabee Sanders told reporters she doesn't believe the president remembered. Well, this is an interesting statement. She doesn't believe, whatever she believes was what the president tells her, that the president remembers. Well, how does she know what she thinks the president remembers? That's what he tells her. He wants to say he believes or whatever. Let's watch.
Does the president recall at that March 31st, 2016 meeting of his National Security Advisory Board, Mr. Papadopoulos suggesting a meeting between then-candidate Trump and Vladimir Putin? Does he recall that?
No, I don't believe he does.
You know, Nicole, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and we're looking at this interesting picture of what looks to be almost a Roosevelt room meeting, but it's obviously some campaign room, where you've got this young fellow, Papadopoulos, sitting off to the left between Sessions at one end of the table and the candidate for president at the other end. And he's been denied. His very existence is being denied now. We're hearing from Sessions now for months. There was no meeting about Russia ever. There was no connection with Russia, blah, blah, blah. We've heard all that. And from Trump now through Huckabee Sanders, we're hearing he does, according to her, she believes, we don't know, she believes what she's told to believe, of course. She has to represent the president. She believes that the president believes or says he believes that he forgot that this guy ever exists. They are going into Operation Separation. It's like Custer's Last Stand. Divide the column, and somehow we'll survive. That seems to be their strategy. Scatter.
Well, and it's one we've seen before. He branded Jeb Bush low-energy Jeb. He branded Marco Rubio little Marco. They decided to brand George Papadopoulos once they learned he'd pled guilty and had been cooperating with Bob Mueller's investigators since at least July. Low-level George. But this isn't, they're not involved in a political campaign anymore. This is definitely not a branding exercise. And Bob Mueller is impervious and indifferent to Donald Trump's smears for his aides. And so I think they've just entered a phase where they may successfully convince the 32% of the country that'll be with Donald Trump till the end of whatever this is, that George Papadopoulos was a low-level aide and doesn't matter. And that may have been their goal. I don't know. But what they say about George Papadopoulos will have no bearing on what Bob Mueller already learned from him. What he may continue to learn from him is Bob Mueller now questions other aides that may have been around the campaign, that may have come into contact with others since Donald Trump was sworn in. So they're entering a phase, as you pointed out at the beginning, where everyone who goes in and answers questions from the FBI, from Bob Mueller's investigators, must tell the truth or they could face perjury charges.
You know, you're inside politically, and I was there too. Maybe not as high as you were, Nicole. You were pretty high. But first of all, I want to go back to something that's so ethnic. It sounds awful, but I'll stick to it. I never met a Russian in politics in 50 years. We didn't have Russians floating in and out of the office, you know, like they're just around. They're at the convention talking about the Ukraine plank and the platform. The Mueller, Manafort was working for the Russians. Carter Page, well, of course, he's working for the Russians. Flynn's having dinner with Vladimir Putin. I mean, give me a break. This Russophiles. But the second point is another thing you can't connect. If you heard in a campaign, when you're downhill, they weren't going to beat Hillary last May, June, whenever. They weren't going to beat her. She got it made, of course. Then they hear that there's somebody over in Russia that's got some little tinker toy information that might be used against Hillary that might turn the tide. Wouldn't you know about it if it came up at the table? Wouldn't you never forget it if it came up at the table you're sitting at and we saw him sitting there with the candidate? He brings up Russia. You go, that's something I won't forget. They've got her emails. They got whatever to use. All they want is somebody to come over there and pick up the junk. Come over and get it. That's all they want. And you wouldn't remember that conversation?
Well, of course you'd remember it, and of course you would pass it on. I mean, if we know one thing about Donald Trump's campaign, I mean, it was good enough that they figured out how to win, but it was small enough that they certainly all knew each other. So this idea that he was some low-level coffee boy is not only insulting and rude and frankly stupid. He's now cooperating with federal investigators, talking about everything he saw and heard on the campaign. So calling him low-level, calling him a coffee boy is not going to help them now. And the idea that, you know, they never forget meetings with anyone from any other country. They have had so many contacts with so many Russians, they all either lie about it, forget about it, or, you know, have to turn states' evidence to talk about it.
Well, President Trump talked to the New York Times tonight by phone late today, and he said, I'm not under investigation, as you know. And when it comes to the Manafort indictment, the president said, and even if you look at that, there's not even a mention of Trump in there. It has nothing to do with us. Joy, what do you think of the flackery that's going on here? All the way down from the president, this Baghdad Bob approach. There was no Russian involvement. There was no flirtation from our side with them. There were no meetings. Jeff Sessions got the memo. There were no meetings. We never met with anybody. Their line of this outer line of defense, their outer redoubt, the perimeter, is so far out there that they look like they're lying from day one because it's never proven to be correct. They've had relations. The Russians are out to change the election. It's all on the paper. It's all news now. It's not an argument. Yeah. What are they up to with this all-out stonewalling, as we call it in Watergate?
Well, and even worse than that, that if there was any collusion, it was Hillary Clinton that was colluding with the Russians.
You're doing their handiwork. You
right,
just did it.
This is what they're trying to do. So you know what's interesting is you have to go back and you have to think about where Donald Trump was in March of 2016 when George Papadopoulos gets brought onto the campaign. When Sam Clovis, who's now in the spotlight as well, assembles Donald Trump's Foreign Policy Advisory Committee. Why did he do that? I've worked on campaigns, and I can tell you every single person on that committee, is not going to be interacting with Corey Lewandowski, who's the campaign manager. What that committee's job is to put together a foreign policy platform that then the speech writers and the policy people and the campaign people can take out to show that this is a serious candidate for president. In March of 2016, nobody thought Donald Trump was a serious potential president. He was seen as somebody with obviously no political experience, no foreign policy experience, just a guy from The Apprentice who was a joke even to Republicans. And the idea that he could be a serious person on foreign policy is something that really bothered Donald Trump. And so he was proactively trying to demonstrate that he would have a platform and a policy platform. What did that platform constantly involve? Better relationships with Russia, changing our attitude toward Russia versus the Ukraine. What were all of these people who were advisors who were sitting on Sam Clovis's committee, which included Jeff Sessions, by the way? Jeff Sessions was sort of the big man on the committee. Yeah. Sam Clovis put it together. They're trying to show their worth. That's what you do.
But who are they working for, the Russians or Trump?
They're working to try to show that they can bring Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin together, that they can create a Trump-Putin axis, that is what Donald Trump is bringing to the table. Every single scandal related to Russiagate has to do with two things. People trying to demonstrate that they can get Trump and Putin in the same room, and people trying to show they can find the 33,000 emails, and that Russia has them. I'm going to go get them and show my worth. That's Trump's problem. All the people ensnared in Russiagate were trying to do one of those two things.
So the way to get ahead in the campaign was to get those two people together. Now the way to get ahead in the legal community is to spend your efforts proving they had nothing to do with each other.
Exactly.
Nicole, did you say something there?
No, but I mean, I agree with Joy, and I think that this idea that Donald Trump was a blank slate on national security and foreign policy is true, with the exception of Russia.
Right.
He had really strong instincts. He had really strong feelings about the way Putin ran his own country, about the things he liked, and about his desire. And he had fights with our colleague Joe Scarborough, Mika Brzezinski. He defended Vladimir Putin when they said, but he's a killer, he kills journalists. He said, well, we kill people too. So for a guy who was a blank slate, who really didn't know much about national security or foreign policy, he knew he liked Vladimir Putin.
Yep. That's when he sounded like Michael Corleone. Who says we don't kill? Anyway, Kate. Anyway, by the way, I remember a president who said they could see into Putin's soul all the way in there. And I forget who that was.
But the policies did not look anything like this president.
Fair enough. Nicole Wallace, thank you. Joy Reid, Carrie Cardera, and Senator Richard Blumenthal. His circle knew what Papadopoulos was up to. We know that Papadopoulos revealed to Mueller's investigators that he had long planned to arrange a meeting in Russia between members of the Trump campaign and Russian officials. NBC News is reporting that Papadopoulos' superior, former Trump campaign co-chair Sam Clovis, testifies allies is, we hardly knew him.
But he was not a person who was involved with the day-to-day operations of the campaign, or a person who I recall interacting with on a regular basis at all.
This was a campaign volunteer. He wasn't somebody that was a senior advisor, as many of you want to bill him to be. He was
threatened by an escalating Russian probe that's now bearing down on the White House itself. President Trump has disavowed George Papadopoulos, the campaign foreign policy advisor who Trump once called an excellent guy. Now that Papadopoulos is a proactive cooperator in the special counsel's investigation, the message from the White House and Trump.
Somebody that played a minimal role, if one at all, and was part of a voluntary advisory board. That's it.
I never heard of Papadopoulos. He never showed up at Trump Tower, never had any interaction with any of the campaign leaders around me. The guy he was the coffee boy.
Well, the bigger question that should be looming over the president right now is who infied before a federal grand jury last week. And now Clovis's attorney appears to be denying a key part of what Papadopoulos revealed to investigators, that her client encouraged a trip to Russia on behalf of the campaign. Quote, Dr. Clovis always vigorously opposed any Russian trip for Donald Trump or staff. But the lawyer added the caveat.